For millions of viewers in the 1960s, she was Granny, gruff, sharp-tongued, and utterly unforgettable. With her gray bun, gingham dress, and no-nonsense sass, Granny Daisy Moses on the Beverly Hillbillies was the heart of the Clampett clan, dishing out wit, moonshine, and tough love with perfect comic timing. But when the cameras stopped rolling and the laughter faded, the woman behind the spectacles and apron was someone quite different. Her name was Irene Ryan, and she was not merely an actress known for one iconic role. She was a seasoned performer whose career spanned over 5 decades, touching nearly every corner of American entertainment. Born in the era of horse-drawn carriages and gas lamps, Irene Ryan saw the world transform before her eyes. She began on the vaudeville stage, where the lights were hot and the laughter live, and she moved through the golden age of radio, then into early cinema, and finally, into living rooms across America through the flickering glow of television. It was a journey few entertainers managed to make, and even fewer with such grace, humility, and quiet resilience. Though her most famous character was rural and folksy, Irene herself was elegant, witty, and deeply professional, a woman who never let go of the discipline she'd learned in the chorus lines and theaters of her youth. Yet behind the applause and bright stage lights was a quieter story, one of determination, reinvention, and quiet heartbreak. Though audiences loved her as the sprightly matriarch who seemed to defy time, Irene Ryan harbored a persistent fear of being replaced, of fading into irrelevance, and of never quite being seen for who she truly was. She faced the ups and downs of the industry with a grace shaped by decades of experience, always moving forward, always performing, even as her personal life carried its own sorrows and solitude. In her later years, just as she was embracing a powerful new chapter on the Broadway stage, tragedy arrived unannounced. But in true theatrical spirit, she left the stage with dignity, having given everything she had to her craft and her audience. And in a final act that mirrored the generosity she showed throughout her life, Irene Ryan ensured that her legacy would be far greater than any single role. This is not simply the story of Granny. This is the story of Irene Ryan, the performer, the patriot, the philanthropist, and the woman behind one of television's most beloved characters. From her humble beginnings in Texas to her final curtain call on Broadway, we'll trace the life of a star who made America laugh and quietly helped it heal. We'll revisit the forgotten theaters, the long-lost film reels, and even the eerily still rooms of a home left behind, as we piece together the portrait of a woman who, in her own quiet way, helped shape the golden age of Hollywood. Long before Irene Ryan became a familiar face to millions, she was simply Irene Noblet, a spirited, bright-eyed girl growing up in El Paso, Texas. The world around her was dusty and sun-drenched, a far cry from the glitz of Hollywood. Yet even then, the stage called to her like a promise. Her childhood was not one of luxury or indulgence, but from the very beginning, she showed an uncanny gift for performance, a magnetic quality that made people stop and look, then stay and listen. That first moment came at just 11 years old. On a warm evening inside San Francisco's Valencia Theater, young Irene stepped nervously onto the stage during an amateur contest. With a voice full of innocence and determination, she sang Pretty Baby, a popular tune of the time. The crowd rewarded her with warm applause, and she walked away with a $3 prize. It was a modest victory by most standards, but for Irene, it felt like a sign. She had tasted the thrill of applause, and she would spend the rest of her life chasing that feeling, refining it, growing with it, becoming part of the long tradition of American performers. By the time she was 14, the pull of the stage had grown too strong to resist. Still too young to legally work under California's labor laws, Irene found her way into a stock theater company by stretching the truth about her age. It was a risky move, but one made out of necessity, because the classroom never held the same fascination for her as the footlights did. She completed only 2 years of high school before making the leap, and once she did, there was no turning back. For 4 formative years, she worked in the often unglamorous trenches of stock theater. The work was demanding, endless rehearsals, low pay, and travel that tested both body and spirit. But it was here that she learned the rhythms of stage life, how to land a joke, how to hold a room, how to recover when a line went wrong or a curtain stuck. These were not just lessons in performance, they were lessons in survival. Every evening performance was a battle for attention, and every paycheck was hard-earned proof that she belonged. California's theater circuit in the early 20th century was both vibrant and volatile. It took talent, yes, but it also took grit. Irene had both. As she moved from town to town and show to show, her style evolved. She developed a knack for comedy, a lightness and wit that delighted audiences even in the smallest venues. She was sharp, expressive, and fearless, and soon she caught the attention of someone who would change the course of her life, a fellow performer named Tim Ryan. But long before they became a beloved comedic duo or shared top billing in theaters across the country, Irene was simply a teenager who had taken a daring leap into the world of performance. She hadn't yet tasted national fame or television success. She didn't yet know what the future would demand of her. But even then, Irene Ryan had shown what would become her defining trait: an unwavering devotion to her craft and a willingness to do whatever it took to keep the spotlight shining, no matter how dim the theater or how distant the applause. As the 1920s dawned and America danced into the age of jazz, Irene Ryan was carving out her place in the bustling, ever-moving world of vaudeville. The theater lights were brighter now, the crowds bigger, and the stakes higher. And it was during this thrilling time, when variety shows crisscrossed the country and performers became household names without the help of television, that Irene met a man who would change the course of her career and her personal life. Tim Ryan was already a fixture on the vaudeville scene. Sharp, confident, and quick with a punchline, he had a presence that matched Irene's own. The chemistry between them was immediate, not just romantic, but artistic. They understood the timing of a good joke, the delicate rhythm of dialogue, the way one performer could set up a moment and the other could knock it down with perfect comedic precision. Before long, they weren't just a couple, they were a team. In 1922, Irene and Tim married, beginning a partnership that would last for 2 decades both on stage and off. Together, they took the vaudeville circuit by storm, crafting a comedy act that blended slapstick, musical numbers, and clever dialogue. Their most memorable routine featured a character type popular at the time: the dumb Dora, a scatterbrained but lovable woman whose innocent misunderstandings and sharp one-liners had audiences roaring with laughter. Irene's portrayal of the character was both warm and razor-sharp, never cruel, always charming, and utterly magnetic. The act was a hit, and the Ryans became regulars on the vaudeville stage, traveling constantly and earning acclaim wherever they went. But as the 1930s brought changes to the entertainment landscape, the couple adapted. They transitioned smoothly into radio, a new medium that brought their voices into homes across the country. Their program, Tim and Irene, captured the same wit and rhythm that had made them vaudeville stars, and their act translated beautifully to the airwaves. Radio gave them reach, and the duo quickly became a sensation. Major shows of the time, such as The Rudy Vallee Show and The Bob Hope Show, welcomed them with open arms. Irene's voice, full of life and personality, shone in every sketch and routine. With every new broadcast, they tightened their comedic bond, proving themselves not just adaptable performers, but consummate professionals. At a time when many vaudevillians struggled to find their footing in the evolving media landscape, the Ryans thrived. Hollywood, too, came calling. The pair began appearing in a series of comedic short films, bringing their act to the silver screen. Titles like The Wacky Family, Hamlet and Eggs, and Will You Stop captured their signature style. Lighthearted, fast-paced, and full of charm. They filmed 11 shorts together, each one cementing their status as reliable entertainers with a devoted following. But like many creative partnerships, theirs was not without strain. After 20 years of marriage and professional collaboration, Irene and Tim Ryan divorced in 1943. The split, while difficult, did not signal the end of their connection. They continued to work together on occasion, driven by mutual respect and a shared history that neither could easily cast aside. This chapter of Irene's life was a whirlwind of laughter, travel, and performance. It was the period that shaped her instincts, tested her endurance, and polished her timing. In the glow of footlights and the scratchy warmth of radio broadcasts, she became not just a capable performer, but a star in her own right. And though the curtain had closed on her marriage, the stage remained, as always, her true constant. The end of Irene Ryan's marriage in 1943 marked more than just the conclusion of a personal chapter. It was also a turning point in her career. For the first time in 2 decades, she was no longer part of a duo. The familiarity of the stage remained, but the rhythm of her work changed. Gone were the routines built for two. In their place came solo performances that demanded a different kind of strength. It was a challenge Irene met with grace. Though separated from Tim Ryan in private life, she remained professionally steady. Their occasional collaborations after the divorce were a testament to their mutual regard, but Irene's ambitions began to stretch in new directions. She had honed her comedic instincts through years of live performance, radio banter, and short films, and now she carried that experience forward into independent roles. She became a sought-after character actress, able to command attention even in supporting parts. Her voice, crisp, expressive, unmistakably warm. Carried her through the airwaves, and her timing, polished by countless live shows, ensured she never missed a beat. But it was offstage, away from the bright lights, that Irene Ryan's resilience and patriotism became most evident. As World War II engulfed the globe, a different kind of performance was called for, one not for cameras or reviews, but for morale. Irene answered that call without hesitation. Having worked with Bob Hope on his namesake radio program, Irene joined his legendary USO tours, traveling with him to perform for American troops stationed overseas. The shows were fast-paced, full of levity, and offered something rare during wartime: laughter. Irene's contributions were no small matter. She flew across oceans, endured difficult conditions, and stepped onto stages improvised in hangars and tents, often with little more than a microphone and a hopeful crowd. The importance of these moments wasn't lost on her. While some performers treated the tours as an extension of their public personas, Irene seemed to understand the deeper purpose. This wasn't about applause or fame. It was about giving something to men and women who had given so much more. The look in their eyes, the tired smiles, the quiet thank yous after a show, these were her rewards. She returned again and again, not just during the war, but later, during the 1948 Berlin airlift, continuing to support the troops long after headlines had shifted. Bob Hope, a veteran of many such tours, once spoke of the strange power of laughter at the front lines. In his words, there's a lump the size of Grant's tomb in your throat when they come up to you and mumble thanks. Irene, who often stood beside him during those quiet exchanges, understood the sentiment all too well. These weren't just gigs, they were acts of service, gestures of humanity in the midst of chaos. While Hollywood buzzed with glamour and post-war reinvention, Irene Ryan was carving out a quieter, deeper legacy. She hadn't vanished from the spotlight, but she had chosen a different path, one marked not by headline roles, but by humility, commitment, and generosity. In an era when fame often demanded constant visibility, she let her work and her heart speak for itself. And when the time came for her to return to the screen, it would not be as a wide-eyed ingenue or a bit player. It would be as a seasoned actress whose journey through radio halls, war zones, and lonely post-divorce stages had prepared her for the role that would define her in the eyes of a nation. But that triumph was still on the horizon, quietly waiting to meet her. By the early 1960s, Irene Ryan had already lived a lifetime in show business. She had charmed vaudeville crowds, sparked laughter on the radio, and soothed weary soldiers with her wartime performances. But as television overtook radio and film in the public's imagination, Irene found herself at a crossroads once again. The medium was changing, and for many performers of her era, the new frontier was an uncertain one. For Irene, however, it would be the place where her most iconic character would finally come to life. In 1962, a new sitcom was quietly taking shape in the offices of CBS. It was called the Beverly Hillbillies, and its premise was as unlikely as it was endearing. A backwoods family struck oil and suddenly thrust into the glittering world of Beverly Hills. The show needed a strong cast to carry its high-concept charm, but perhaps more than anything, it needed the perfect granny. A feisty, no-nonsense matriarch who could anchor the Clampett family with equal parts heart and hilarity. But Irene Ryan was not the immediate favorite for the role. In fact, she was nearly overlooked. The show's creator, Paul Henning, had been working closely with a casting agent to fill the part, and their list of candidates did not initially include Irene. To them, she didn't quite fit the image they had in mind. But Irene wasn't one to sit back and wait for someone else to decide her fate. She had been through too much, seen too many doors closed, and had spent too long on the fringes of recognition to let this opportunity pass quietly. Determined to be seen, she reached out directly to Henning. "Do I have to go home and get my gray wig and shawl to convince you?" she reportedly asked, half in jest but full of resolve. Her point was clear. She knew the role, she could embody it, and she was ready. Henning, struck by her confidence and charm, agreed to give her a chance. In one version of events, he recalled her stopping by his office unexpectedly. When he asked if she thought she could play a hillbilly, she didn't hesitate. Instead, she launched into a story about a stock company she had once toured with in Arkansas, where a theater manager refused to let the audience in before the curtain rose, afraid they'd whittle away the seats. "So yeah," she said with a grin, "I know hillbillies." That was all Henning needed to hear. It wasn't just her timing or wit. It was the authenticity behind her humor. She didn't play characters, she inhabited them. When screen tests were conducted shortly afterward, any remaining doubt evaporated. Irene's reading was sharp, funny, and grounded. Fellow actress Bea Benaderet, who also read for the part, turned to Henning and said simply, "There's Granny." And she was right. Irene Ryan was offered the role of Daisy Moses, Granny to the Clampett family, and soon, to the entire nation. It was a defining moment for Irene. After decades of supporting roles and tireless performances, the spotlight had finally found her. But more importantly, she had earned it, not through luck or timing, but through boldness, experience, and the unshakable belief that the role was hers to play. With that, Irene Ryan stepped onto a new stage, one far bigger and brighter than any she had known. She was about to become a household name. But behind the homespun charm and comic gruffness of Granny was a woman whose long journey to that moment had been anything but easy. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered on American television screens in 1962, no one could have predicted the cultural wave it would unleash. Its premise, a poor mountain family suddenly thrust into the wealth and whimsy of Beverly Hills, was as delightfully absurd as it was endearing. But it was Irene Ryan's portrayal of Granny Daisy Moses that anchored the show with a warmth and fire audiences couldn't resist. Within weeks, a nation that had never heard of her name was quoting her lines, mimicking her expressions, and falling in love with a character who felt both timeless and real. Granny was not merely comic relief. She was the soul of the Clampett family, fiercely protective, quick to judge, but always deeply loving. Daisy Moses stood as a symbol of old-world values transplanted into a glittering, unfamiliar world. She scowled at modern appliances, offered dubious home remedies, and referred to swimming pools as cement ponds. Yet beneath the stubborn exterior was a deep, unwavering loyalty to her kin. It was a role that required not just comedic timing, but depth, and Irene played it with a masterful balance of bite and tenderness. The response was immediate. Just 3 weeks after its debut, the Beverly Hillbillies rocketed to the #1 spot in television ratings, a record-breaking ascent that even unseated Bob Hope, whose programs had long dominated the airwaves. Viewers of every age, from coast to coast, were tuning in weekly to watch the Clampetts fumble their way through the high society of Beverly Hills. Children giggled at Jethro's antics, adults chuckled at Granny's old-school wisdom, and seniors nodded with recognition at the generational misunderstandings. Behind the scenes, the cast formed a close-knit ensemble. Buddy Ebsen as the kindly patriarch Jed, Donna Douglas as the sweet and innocent Ellie Mae, and Max Baer Jr. as the dim-witted but lovable Jethro brought their characters to life with heart. But it was Irene Ryan, always prepared and always early to set, who set the tone. Despite her character's age, she was still in her late 50s when filming began, and she worked tirelessly to ensure every scene landed just right. In interviews, she often confessed to a lingering fear that the role might be taken from her at any moment. "I was always scared I would be fired," she admitted candidly. "And you know something? I'm still scared." That fear never showed on camera, but it lived within her, a quiet reminder of the unpredictability of show business and of the years she had spent climbing toward this moment. After decades of touring stages and recording radio shows, she knew how quickly the curtain could fall. But the curtain did not fall. Instead, it stayed lifted for 9 remarkable seasons. From 1962 to 1971, Irene Ryan appeared in all 274 episodes of the Beverly Hillbillies, becoming a fixture of American pop culture. Her character's stubborn charm and sharp wit became iconic, and her performance earned her 2 Emmy nominations, remarkable recognition for an actress who had spent so many years just outside the glow of national fame. The set may have been filled with laughs, but it was Irene's work ethic that left the deepest impression. She approached every episode as if it were her first, rehearsing carefully, arriving early, and always delivering. Her transformation each day, from Irene Ryan, the disciplined stage veteran, into Granny Moses, the Spitfire matriarch, required patience and skill. But she never wavered. She knew the character had struck a chord, and she gave the audience her very best, week after week. In homes across the country, Granny was more than just a character. She was family. And in the studio halls of Hollywood, Irene Ryan had finally found the role that would place her unmistakably in the stars. To millions of viewers, Granny Daisy Moses seemed as old as the hills. With her silver hair pulled into a tight bun, her weathered scowl, and her tales of Civil War-era traditions, audiences assumed they were watching a woman well into her 80s. But the truth was far more surprising. When the Beverly Hillbillies premiered, Irene Ryan was just 59 years old, nearly 2 decades younger than the character she so convincingly portrayed. The illusion was crafted with care. Each day on set, she underwent a meticulous transformation. Heavy makeup was applied to etch deep lines into her face, shadows painted to give the impression of sagging skin and tired eyes. Her voice, naturally strong and vibrant, took on a raspier, more weathered tone for the role. The wardrobe department completed the effect with dowdy dresses, woolen shawls, and thick orthopedic shoes. With television's lower resolution in those years, the transformation was seamless. Viewers rarely questioned her age. Yet beneath the disguise, Irene remained every bit the vibrant performer she had always been. She was sharp, witty, and full of energy, traits she infused subtly into Granny, giving the character a spark that lifted her beyond caricature. In interviews, she laughed about how strangers barely noticed her in public unless she spoke. "My voice always gives me away," she once remarked with amusement. "I can walk down the street and not be noticed until I open my mouth." That disconnect between the role and the woman behind it only widened as time went on. While Granny grew grumpier and more old-fashioned on screen, Irene remained a dedicated, dynamic artist off it. Her decades in the business had made her keenly aware of how quickly fame could fade, and so she never allowed herself the luxury of complacency. She arrived on set early, learned every line precisely, and never once assumed her job was secure. "All my life I've been on time," she told a reporter in 1965. "I was always scared I would be fired. And you know something? I'm still scared." That quiet humility, perhaps born from the hard years of vaudeville and radio, never left her. Even as she found herself on one of the most watched television shows in the country, she remained vigilant. To her, success was never a guarantee. It was something to be earned daily. Off camera, Irene Ryan was also very different from her famously fiery character. Where Granny could be brusque and bristling, Irene was known for her warmth. She carried herself with grace, treated crew and co-stars with kindness, and cherished the chance to make people laugh. She loved the work. She loved the audience. And despite her age-defying performance, she wasn't concerned with hiding her years. "I won't say how old I am," she once joked, "but I've played in every type of show business for over 50 years, except burlesque. I was never the type." She found joy in unexpected places, on stage in Las Vegas, on the road meeting fans, and in the smaller moments when people told her how much Granny meant to them. Even though the role tied her closely to one single image, Irene welcomed the connection. She carried bits of Granny in her luggage, she said, in case audiences expected her to bring the character to life during personal appearances. And she always did, never tired of seeing the joy the old woman in the gray wig could still inspire. Behind the aging makeup and country drawl was a woman who had worked tirelessly, loved deeply, and never stopped believing in the power of performance. She may have dressed like someone's great-grandmother, but inside, Irene Ryan remained as spirited and hopeful as that 11-year-old girl who once sang for $3 and a dream. When the Beverly Hillbillies came to an end in 1971, Irene Ryan was nearly 70, but she had no intention of slowing down. Most actresses at that age might have gracefully bowed out, content with the success they had achieved. But for Irene, the idea of retirement was unimaginable. "Retire," she once said with a smile. "Honey, I want to die with my boots on." And she meant it. The end of the television show gave her something she had not had in years, the chance to return to her first love, the stage. Live theater had been her entry into the world of performance, and after decades in radio, film, and television, she yearned for its immediacy, its electricity. It wasn't the fame or the applause that drew her back. It was the craft itself, the discipline of rehearsal, the thrill of a live audience, the intimacy of a moment shared with strangers in the dark. And so, in the early 1970s, Irene auditioned for a bold new musical headed for Broadway, Pippin. Created by Bob Fosse and Stephen Schwartz, the show was modern, innovative, and full of youthful energy, a far cry from the world of Granny Clampett. Yet Irene secured the role of Bert, the eccentric, wise, and delightfully irreverent grandmother. It was a perfect match. Night after night, she performed the show-stopping number No Time at All, delivering the song with a twinkle in her eye and a voice full of truth. She told audiences to take chances, to live fully, and not to waste a single day. When she sang, the theater held its breath, and when she finished, it erupted. According to the New York Times, she stopped the show cold every night. The applause lasted so long that her co-stars had to wait in silence before continuing. Her performance was more than just a success, it was a revelation. For many younger theatergoers, Irene Ryan was known only as Granny. But on that stage, she proved herself again. A true performer who could command a Broadway house with just 10 minutes of song and presence. In 1973, she was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Featured Actress in a Musical. It was a rare honor for someone in the twilight of their career, and a tribute to a woman whose devotion to her craft had never wavered. Backstage, Irene was as energetic as ever. Though petite in stature, barely over 5 feet tall, she had a spirit that lit up every corner of the theater. She stayed late with the crew, joked with fellow cast members, and soaked in every moment with gratitude. Even as age tugged at her body, her mind and spirit remained sharp. She moved through the chaos of Broadway with the ease of someone half her age. Then, on March 10th, 1973, tragedy struck. During a performance, she suddenly collapsed on stage. The audience watched in stunned silence as the curtain fell. She was rushed to a hospital in Los Angeles, and though she returned briefly to rest, her health declined quickly. On April 26, 1973, Irene Ryan passed away. The official causes were a stroke, glioblastoma, and arteriosclerotic heart disease. She was 70 years old, but she had fulfilled her promise. She had stayed on stage, doing what she loved until her final breath was near. She had reminded the world that age is not a barrier to brilliance, and she had, in the end, died with her boots on. Irene Ryan's final act was not performed on stage, but in the quiet, deliberate choices she made in her will. Long before her passing, she had already decided how her fortune would be used. Not to build monuments, not to finance a memoir, but to give young actors a chance to follow in her footsteps. In a gesture that perfectly reflected the values she had lived by, she left her entire estate, over $1 million, to create a scholarship fund for theater students across the country. The Irene Ryan Foundation was born out of a simple belief that talent, when nurtured, could change a life. Having climbed the rungs of the entertainment world herself, from amateur contests to vaudeville stages, radio shows to Broadway, she understood the obstacles young performers faced. The uncertainty, the expense, the long stretches between auditions. She knew that behind every star was a moment when someone believed in them. And so she chose to become that someone for countless others. Administered through the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival, the Irene Ryan Acting Scholarships have since become a cornerstone of collegiate theater in the United States. Each year, thousands of students compete for a chance to receive financial support, performance training, and national recognition. For many, the award represents more than just money. It is validation from a figure who understood the journey they were on and who cared enough to reach back and lift them forward. Ryan had no children of her own and no immediate family to leave her estate to. But in choosing to invest in the next generation, she created something far more lasting than inheritance. She built a legacy of encouragement. She turned her life's earnings into a light for others to follow. In interviews, Irene had always been humble about her success. She credited hard work, timing, and the kindness of others. And in establishing the foundation, she closed the circle, passing that kindness forward, not with fanfare, but with quiet grace. She had spent decades making people laugh, lifting spirits, and sharing joy. In the end, she made sure that others would have the same chance to do the same. Those who have received the Irene Ryan Scholarship often speak of her as if she were a mentor, though they never met her. Her name appears on certificates, in programs, and on resumes, always connected to growth, encouragement, and opportunity. And in that way, she has remained present in the lives of countless performers, guiding them not from a stage, but from memory. While the public remembers her as Granny, those in the theater world remember her as something more: a benefactor, a believer, and a guardian of the performing arts. She may have played an elderly matriarch on television, but in reality, Irene Ryan was a trailblazer whose vision reached far beyond the camera lens. Through the Irene Ryan Foundation, her legacy is not just preserved, it is living, breathing, and growing with each new student who steps into the spotlight, buoyed by her generosity. Today, nestled quietly among overgrown grass and faded paint, stands a modest home once owned by Irene Ryan. Time has not been kind to the property. Its windows are darkened, its walls weathered by sun and rain, and its rooms left still, as if paused in mid-conversation. Some say that inside, remnants of her life remain untouched: framed photographs, yellowed newspaper clippings, and keepsakes tucked into dusty corners. The house, long since abandoned, tells its own story, not of glamour, but of solitude, of reflection, and of a woman who gave her light to the world and returned to quiet. It's a striking contrast to the bright stage lights and swelling applause that had accompanied so much of her life. On television, she had lived in a Beverly Hills mansion. Fictional, yes, but grand and sparkling. In reality, her dwelling was simple, unassuming, and deeply personal. It did not need to be extravagant. She had never measured success by things she could touch. For Irene Ryan, fulfillment came through performance, through connection, and through legacy. She passed away without children, without headlines shouting her final days, and without the sprawling estates or scandals that so often accompanied her contemporaries. And yet, what she left behind has proven far more enduring. She left the memory of a character who made generations laugh. She left the record of a career marked by versatility, discipline, and relentless effort. And she left the gift of opportunity for those who might never have had a chance to step into the arts without her quiet generosity. Her co-stars remembered her as a joy to work with. Fans continued to cherish the show long after it ended. And each year, young performers speak her name with reverence, not because she sought recognition, but because she made it possible for them to dream. In the annals of Hollywood history, Irene Ryan's name may not be carved into sidewalks or etched into marquees, but in the hearts of those she entertained and the lives of those she uplifted, her presence endures. She was more than a character, more than a star, more than a funny, feisty grandmother in a gingham dress. She was a consummate performer, a quiet trailblazer, and a generous soul who believed in the next act, even if she wasn't around to take the stage. Her house may be silent now, but her legacy speaks, still. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories of Hollywood's golden era.